What if I told you that the universe was born not in peace, but in the corpse of a slain dragon? This is the ancient Babylonian story of Marduk, the storm-born champion who rose against Tiamat, the primordial mother of chaos. A tale of cosmic battle, the birth of the world, and the eternal balance between order and the abyss. But before we dive into it, make sure to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy relaxing mythology stories. It really helps the channel grow and brings more tales your way. Close your eyes and imagine the silence before creation. There was no sky, no earth, no time. Only the mingled waters of Apsu, the deep of fresh springs, and Tiamat, the endless salt sea. Together they drifted in timelessness, their currents intertwining, and from their union the first gods began to stir. Young and restless, they moved within the stillness, their voices echoing in the vastness, their energy disrupting the eternal calm. And in this rising tension, the fate of all creation began to take shape. In the beginning, before the gods themselves had names, before the heavens and the earth had been separated, there was only the vast and formless primordial waters. From this eternal, boundless sea arose two great beings, ancient beyond comprehension. Apsu, the embodiment of fresh, life-giving waters, calm and deep, and Tiamat, the boundless saltwater ocean, the untamed and chaotic abyss. They mingled together in the eternal expanse, neither truly separate nor joined, a harmony of opposites giving rise to the potential of creation. From their union, currents began to stir, and in these cosmic tides, younger gods emerged. At first they were gentle, simple beings of water and breath, but as their numbers grew, their presence began to disturb the stillness of their ancient parents. The younger gods moved about, their energies clashing like ripples upon the calm. They sang, shouted, and stirred the deep, and the primordial silence of Apsu and Tiamat was broken forever. Among these younger gods were Lahmu and Lahamu, spirits of mud and silt, firstborn children of the mingled waters. Then came Anshar and Kishar, the horizons of heaven and earth, stretching vast and endless. From them descended Anu, the shining sky god, who would father Enki, the wise lord of the deep waters, and Enlil, the lord of wind and storm. The divine family multiplied, each embodying an aspect of the growing cosmos, but their movement and voices disturbed the peace of their ancient parents. Apsu, weary of their endless restlessness, confided in Tiamat. He longed for the silence of the deep. He sought to destroy the younger gods so that peace might return. But Tiamat, though fierce, still loved her children. But she could not bring herself to strike them. She tried to calm Apsu, urging patience. Yet the younger gods, full of vigor and brightness, continued to disturb the primordial quiet. Their songs were loud, their power growing, and their laughter echoed in the deep waters. Finally, Apsu made his decision. He would act against the younger gods, to silence them forever. When Tiamat hesitated, he sought the counsel of his vizier, Mumu, who encouraged his wrath. Apsu prepared to unleash his power, but the younger gods learned of his plan. For the wise Ea, also known as Enki, was cunning and full of foresight. Ea uncovered Apsu's scheme, and before the old god could act, Ea moved swiftly. With enchantments of power and deep wisdom, Ea cast Apsu into a deep sleep, bound him, and slew him. From Apsu's very body, Ea created his dwelling place, the great subterranean waters, the foundation upon which the world would grow. Thus the younger gods triumphed over the old, but Tiamat's grief was immeasurable. Her companion, the ancient Apsu, was gone, slain by her own children. Her heart, once divided between love and rage, turned fully toward vengeance. For though she had stayed her hand before, now she resolved to rise against the gods who had taken from her the calm of the abyss and the one who had shared her eternity. Tiamat's sorrow turned to fury, and her fury to war. From the depths of the chaotic seas, she began to gather her strength. No longer would she restrain herself for the sake of her unruly children. She would become the embodiment of chaos itself, the storming ocean, the monstrous abyss. And through her vengeance, she would reclaim silence and dominion. To prepare, she gave birth to an army of terrifying beings, creatures unlike any the younger gods had ever faced. They were serpents with sharp teeth, venomous dragons, raging storms given monstrous form, lions with men's heads, scorpion men with stingers like lightning, fishmen that rose from the deep, and great horned demons. These were the 11 monsters, her chosen children of chaos, formed to wage war against the rebellious gods. At her side, she placed Kingu, her new consort, chosen to replace the slain Apsu. Tiamat entrusted him with the tablets of destiny, the divine seals that granted supreme authority over the universe. With the tablets bound upon his breast, Kingu became the commander of her army, wielding authority over fate itself. The heavens trembled at this rise of chaos, and the younger gods grew fearful. They saw in Tiamat not only their mother, but now a monstrous adversary, a cosmic storm that could unmake all that had been set in motion. Ea, though wise, was struck with dread at the thought of facing Tiamat. Her fury was unlike anything he had known. He turned to Anu, the great sky god, and begged him to stand against her. Anu tried to approach, but even he, Lord of the heavens, recoiled before her vast and terrifying presence. None of the gods dared to rise against the mother of chaos, for her form was like a tempest without end, her breath fire, her roar thunder, her body the endless sea itself. It was then that a new figure emerged, Marduk, the son of Ea, born of wisdom and strength, destined for greatness. He was a young god, but unlike his forebears, he carried within him both courage and cunning, the perfect balance of his lineage. Tall and radiant, with eyes of lightning and lips that breathed fire, Marduk was a being whose very presence stirred awe. The gods turned to him in their desperation, for no one else had the power, the resolve, or the daring to stand against the Chaos Mother. Marduk did not refuse, but he placed a condition before the assembly of gods. If he were to go forth and defeat Tiamat, he must be granted supreme authority to rule over gods and men alike. He would not risk his life for a fleeting victory if his role among them remained uncertain. The gods, desperate for deliverance, agreed. They proclaimed him their champion, their king, and they granted him divine weapons forged for the battle. They gave him a great net to ensnare his foe, a bow and arrow carved with cosmic precision, a club of strength, and a lightning spear that flashed with the power of the storms. With these weapons and the winds themselves at his command, Marduk prepared to face the chaos that had risen from the depths. The assembly of gods placed their fate in his hands, and the cosmos held its breath as the young champion rose to meet the primordial sea dragon who had given birth to them all. Marduk stood before the assembly of gods, his radiance blazing like the morning sun breaking through storm clouds. They had placed their trust in him, granting him supreme authority, the tablets of destiny yet to be wrested from Kingu, but the will of the divine council already made clear. They clothed him in an invincible garment, and when he spoke a command, the garment obeyed as if it were alive. The gods tested his power, for they wished to be certain that their champion could reshape the cosmos. When Marduk ordered the garment to vanish, it dissolved into nothingness. And when he commanded it to return, it reappeared instantly before their eyes. A great cheer rose up among them, for they knew their hope was not in vain. Armed with celestial weapons, Marduk prepared for the journey into the heart of the chaotic waters, where Tiamat and her monstrous legions gathered. He took with him the four winds, creations of his power, fierce and unyielding. To these he added a whirlwind, a tempest, and a hurricane, all bound at his side, ready to unleash against his foe. His bow shone like the arc of the heavens, his arrows like lightning bolts. In one hand he carried a great net, woven to trap the uncontainable, and in the other he gripped the spear that glittered like a star at dawn. His form was terrible in majesty, yet it was with calm resolve that he set forth. The gods watched with both dread and awe as Marduk climbed into his chariot, pulled by storm dragons of fierce and unearthly power. Their bodies were armored with scales like iron, their teeth sharp, their eyes burning with fire. With reins of gold he guided them, and as the chariot moved, the heavens quaked, the seas surged, and the very foundations of creation trembled. It was not only a battle that awaited him, but the shaping of existence itself. For should he triumph, a new order would rise from the fragments of chaos. Should he fall, all would be returned to the silent waters of eternity. Into the heart of the abyss he descended. Tiamat rose to meet him, her monstrous body stretching vast as the horizon. Her voice was a roar that shook the seas, her breath seething with flame, her scales flashing with the brilliance of 1,000 suns reflected on stormy waters. Around her gathered the 11 monsters, each more terrifying than the last, led by Kingu, whose breast bore the tablets of destiny. Their cries echoed through the void, a chorus of dread that made the stars shudder in their places. Yet Marduk did not falter. He tightened his grip on the reins, set his bow across his knees, and with eyes blazing, he called out to Tiamat. The moment had come. The younger gods had risen against their mother, and the fate of all creation would be decided in the clash between the storm-born champion and the ancient sea dragon who had given birth to them all. When Tiamat beheld Marduk, she opened her mouth in a roar that was like the sound of 1,000 waves crashing against the shore. Her breath was fire, her voice thunder. She mocked him, for to her eyes he was but a child of the gods, daring to face the infinite waters from which all life had sprung. Yet Marduk answered not with words, but with action. He cast forth the net, spreading it wide across the face of the abyss. The winds he had bound surged forth at his command, filling Tiamat's open mouth, driving against her body, pressing her back, leaving her unable to close her jaws. The raging storm pinned her in place, caught in the snares of the young champion. Seizing the moment, Marduk raised his bow and loosed an arrow, swift and sure. The shaft flew straight into the gaping mouth of Tiamat, piercing her heart. A cry unlike any heard before shook the cosmos, a scream that was both agony and the breaking of the primordial order. Tiamat convulsed, her vast body thrashing as the sea itself rose in upheaval. But the arrow had struck true. Her strength faltered, her fury dissolved, and the great mother of chaos was undone by the son of wisdom and storm. The monsters she had birthed shrieked in terror, for their creator had fallen. Marduk pressed his attack, drawing near to her vast body. With his club, he shattered her skull, splitting it as lightning splits a mountain peak. Her blood poured out into the deep, staining the waters of eternity. The 11 monsters, bereft of her power, fled in confusion. Kingu, who had borne the tablets of destiny, was seized and bound. Marduk stripped the tablets from his breast, claiming the authority of fate itself. Victory belonged to him, but the battle was only the beginning. For from the body of Tiamat, the young god saw the potential for creation. He did not simply slay her and let her carcass sink into the abyss. Instead, he worked with wisdom and purpose, shaping from her body the very structure of the cosmos. He split her in two, stretching one half across the heavens to form the firmament of the sky. The other half he laid down as the foundation of the earth. From her eyes he carved the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, lifeblood of the land. From her body he raised mountains. From her saliva he shaped clouds. And from her breasts the springs of the deep. Order rose from chaos, form from formlessness, all wrought from the defeated body of the mother of storms. Thus, from the battle of Marduk and Tiamat, the world itself was born. The younger gods watched in awe, for in the ruins of chaos, their champion had not only triumphed, but also given them a dwelling, a cosmos ordered and alive, where sky and land were fixed, where rivers flowed, and where life could find its place. The corpse of Tiamat lay vast and still, yet from her ruin the seeds of life began to stir. Marduk looked upon the endless expanse of waters and saw in her body the material of a new order. Where once there had been only the swirling abyss, now there would be separation, structure, and harmony. He stretched out her ribs and formed them into the vault of heaven, arching high above the earth, a dome that held back the waters of the deep above. Into this firmament he fixed the stations of the gods, assigning them their places in the sky, each to guard and govern the cycles of time. The stars were set as markers, to divide the days, months, and years, to guide both gods and men when their time would come. With care and precision, Marduk ordained the paths of the moon and the sun. He assigned the moon to measure the passage of months, waxing and waning in rhythm with the tides, a silent keeper of cycles. The sun he placed as a great light to traverse the heavens, rising and setting in its eternal journey, bringing warmth, light, and the turning of the season. To the gods he gave dominion over constellations, guardianship over the days of the year, and duties that ensured the harmony of heaven and earth. The cosmos was not left to drift in chance. It was ordered, purposeful, filled with balance. The defeated monsters of Tiamat were bound and set to service, their fury quenched, their strength harnessed for the stability of creation. Kingu, stripped of the tablets of destiny, was brought low before Marduk. From his blood, mingled with clay, the gods fashioned the first humans, a creation born to bear the labor that the divine assembly no longer wished to endure. Humanity was shaped to serve the gods, to tend their temples, to offer sacrifices, and to keep the rhythms of the world in motion. Though born from rebellion and chaos, mankind was also touched by the divine, for in their making was mingled the essence of both God and earth. When the work was complete, the gods marveled. From the fury of the primordial sea, from the ruin of their mother, a new world had been established. Marduk, their champion, had not only saved them from destruction, but had given them a dwelling place unlike any before. For his victory, the gods decreed him their king, the ruler of heaven and earth, whose word was law, whose command none could question. His name was proclaimed in 50 great titles, each embodying an aspect of his power. He became Lord of Lords, Master of Storms, Shepherd of the Gods, Creator of Order, and the one who set the stars upon their courses. The story of Marduk's triumph was etched into the memory of the gods, and the heavens themselves bore witness. The waters still carried the echo of Tiamat's roar, but now they also carried the quiet rhythm of rivers, rains, and seas that nourished the earth. Chaos was not destroyed, but it had been subdued and transformed into the foundation of life. The new world was fragile, yet it was alive, born from the clash of storm and sea, from the defiance of a sun against the ancient mother of all. Marduk's reign began not in ease, but in the weight of responsibility. The gods gathered to praise him, offering their loyalty, but also looking to him for order. Each deity was given a station, a role in the maintenance of creation. To Anu remained the vault of the heavens, the highest throne of the sky. To Enlil, lord of the winds, was granted command over the air, the breath of life, and the storms that moved across the earth. To Ea, wise in all things, was given dominion over the waters of the deep, the hidden wisdom that lay beneath the foundations of the world. Each god rejoiced in their portion, yet it was Marduk who stood above them all, the axis around which the cosmos now turned. The temples of the gods were established upon the earth, places where divinity could touch the mortal realm. Among these, Marduk's own temple in Babylon rose in splendor, a house dedicated to the king of the gods, built as a reflection of the ordered heavens he had shaped. The city itself became a mirror of the cosmos, a place where humans served not only their daily needs, but also the eternal rhythm of divine law. Rituals, festivals, and offerings maintained the bond between gods and men, ensuring the balance that Marduk had forged from the ruin of Tiamat. Yet beneath this order, the memory of chaos still lingered. The blood of Kingu flowed in the veins of mankind, a reminder of rebellion and strife. Within the deep, the waters of Tiamat still surged, though bound by the firmament, always pressing against the walls of creation. It was a fragile harmony, sustained only by vigilance, ritual, and the will of the gods. Marduk knew that the world would always carry within it both order and chaos, for one had been born from the other, and they could not be fully separated. In time, myths and hymns spread across the lands, telling of Marduk's battle and victory. Priests recited the tale during festivals of renewal, particularly at the New Year, when the Enuma Elish was spoken aloud in Babylon to remind all of the triumph of order over chaos. Each retelling was not merely a memory, but a ritual act, a reaffirmation of the cosmic balance. As the story was spoken, it was as though Marduk once again split the body of Tiamat, once again set the stars upon their courses, once again breathed order into the formless deep. Thus the story of Marduk was not only history, but also living ritual. It shaped the way men understood their world, their duties, and their place between gods and earth. They were not free to wander without purpose, but were bound to the service of the divine, born from blood and clay, tasked with preserving the balance that Marduk had fought to establish. And so, as long as the rivers flowed, as long as the sun rose, and as long as the moon measured the months, the story of Marduk's triumph would echo in the hearts of gods and men alike. The memory of Tiamat's defeat lingered not only in myth but in the very fabric of existence. For though she was slain, her body became the foundation of all that lived. Every mountain bore her bones, every sea her blood, every river her tears. To walk upon the earth was to tread upon the ancient mother, and to breathe the air was to breathe what had once been her sigh. The gods knew this truth, and mankind, though unaware in daily life, felt it in ritual and story. Order had triumphed, but chaos was never fully gone. It was hidden, folded into the world itself. Marduk, enthroned as king of the gods, was not a distant sovereign. He was active in shaping the destiny of all things. He placed boundaries between waters and land, between night and day, between the realms of gods and mortals. His word was law, and in that law resided stability. The younger gods rejoiced, for they no longer trembled before the monstrous roar of Tiamat, nor feared the silence of Apsu's depth. Instead, they dwelled in the ordered heavens, shining with roles and responsibilities, their stations eternal as the constellations. But harmony came with its burdens. Humanity, shaped from the blood of Kingu and the clay of the earth, bore within them the duality of service and rebellion. They were created to free the gods from toil, to till the soil, to raise the temples, and to bring offerings. Yet in their veins pulsed the defiance of a slain rebel. Though bound by duty, they also carried restlessness, ambition, and yearning. This tension made them both valuable and unpredictable. The gods looked upon them with both favor and caution, knowing that mankind's nature was as mixed as the waters of Apsu and Tiamat had once been. In Babylon, the center of Marduk's worship, men raised ziggurats that reached toward the heavens. These towers of brick and stone were not merely buildings, but reflections of the cosmic mountain, the link between heaven and earth. At their summits, priests chanted hymns, recited the story of creation, and offered sacrifices that echoed the first triumph. In the sound of their voices, the gods were honored and reminded that order must be renewed continually. For if ever the ritual ceased, chaos might again seep through the cracks of creation. And so the people lived, their daily labors bound to cosmic duty. Each harvest, each offering, each prayer was more than survival. It was a thread in the great tapestry woven from the corpse of Tiamat. To neglect these duties would be to weaken the order Marduk had forged, to invite the restless waters to surge once more. Humanity's service was not slavery alone. It was participation in the divine drama, a chance to share in the responsibility of keeping the world alive. The gods themselves celebrated Marduk's greatness with feasts and proclamations. In their assembly, they granted him 50 exalted names, each a reflection of his dominion. They called him Asaluhi, the bringer of magic, for his wisdom matched that of Ea. They named him Tutu, the one who restores life, for from chaos he had drawn forth existence. He was called Bel, the Lord, who commands with sovereign authority, and he was also known as Enbilulu, Lord of the rivers, who set their courses and gave fertility to the land. Each name was not simply a title, but a facet of his being, a truth of his divine nature, woven into the cosmos. The recitation of these names was an act of power. To speak them aloud was to acknowledge the foundation of order, to invoke the presence of the God who shaped the universe. During the Great New Year festival, priests in Babylon would chant these names, their voices echoing through the halls of Esagila, Marduk's mighty temple. The people gathered, listening as the cosmos was spoken into remembrance, as if Marduk once again fought the chaos dragon and laid down the world anew. In this ritual, time itself was renewed, for the myth was not past, but ever present, alive in the breath of those who told it. From these names flowed identity. They reminded the gods of Marduk's sovereignty, and they reminded men of their place within the design. They spoke of storms and lightning, of rivers and mountains, of law and kingship, of wisdom and judgment. All these were bound within Marduk, who stood as both warrior and creator, both judge and shepherd. He was not a god of single form, but a god of balance, the one who united opposites into harmony. In the silence of night, when stars shone in their courses, men looked upward and remembered. The constellations were the stations Marduk had set for the gods, guardians of order against the pull of chaos. The moon traced its cycle, the sun its daily path, each obedient to the decree spoken when the world was young. And beneath it all, the rivers flowed, carrying life through the land, their waters both blessing and reminder. For they too had sprung from the slain body of Tiamat, her endless essence reshaped into nourishment. Thus, the story of Marduk was not only a tale of victory, but a vision of the cosmos itself. Every name, every ritual, every star and river spoke of the battle that had once been fought. And though the mother of chaos lay divided, her shadow still lingered. For order is never without its opposite. And beneath the ordered sky, the deep still whispered of the ancient sea. The shadow of Tiamat's defeat lingered not only in the distant waters, but in the hearts of men. For though Marduk had brought order, the memory of chaos could not be erased. Humanity, born from the mingling of clay and Kingu's blood, was both fragile and restless. They toiled in service to the gods, building temples, raising altars, and offering the fruits of their labor. Yet in their blood ran the pulse of rebellion, the echo of a commander who once bore the tablets of destiny. Within them was both obedience and defiance, both devotion and yearning. The priests of Babylon understood this dual nature. They reminded the people that their work was sacred, that every brick laid, every field plowed, every sacrifice offered was part of the divine order. Labor was not merely survival, it was worship, a cosmic duty. For if men faltered, the gods themselves would be burdened once more with toil, and the delicate balance would weaken. The rituals were more than gestures. They were acts of renewal, keeping alive the order Marduk had forged in battle. And so the New Year festival became the heartbeat of the city. For 12 days the story of creation was recited, the Enuma Elish spoken in full, its verses carrying the power of remembrance. On those days, the priests took on the voices of gods, reliving the triumph, reshaping the cosmos through word and rhythm. The people watched as their city was renewed, as Marduk was once again enthroned as king of heaven and earth. They saw their role affirmed, their service justified, their place within the eternal drama made clear. The temple of Esagila in Babylon stood as the center of this renewal. Its great ziggurat rose tier upon tier, each level reaching closer to the heavens, symbol of the mountain of the gods. At its summit, the rituals were performed, binding heaven and earth together. The city below thrummed with life, its streets filled with processions, its altars heavy with offerings, its people moving in harmony with the cycle of the cosmos. To live in Babylon was to live at the very heart of creation, where Marduk's victory was honored not as distant memory, but as present truth. Yet even in this splendor, the whisper of chaos could be felt. The rivers that brought life could also flood and destroy. The storms that nourished the fields could also tear them apart. The order of Marduk was strong, but it required constant renewal, constant attention. For chaos was not dead. It had been reshaped, bound, and ordered. But it still pulsed beneath the surface of things. And so men prayed, gods ruled, and rituals renewed the fragile harmony that made life possible. Among the gods, the memory of Marduk's triumph defined their order. No longer was the assembly a restless gathering of quarrelsome beings. Now each had their role, their place within the design. Anu, Lord of the Sky, remained distant and high, a figure of majesty. Enlil, Master of Winds, governed the air and storms. Ea, the Wise, still held the depths and hidden springs of knowledge. But over them all ruled Marduk, whose decree none could overrule. His kingship was not born of inheritance alone, but of victory. He had proven himself in the crucible of battle, and so his rule was eternal. The tablets of destiny, once upon Kingu's breast, now lay secure in Marduk's possession. They were the symbol of authority over all fates, the seal of the cosmic order. In their inscriptions lay the decrees of time, the paths of stars, the cycles of life and death. With them, Marduk shaped the destiny of gods and men, ensuring that the world would move according to his command. What had once been stolen by rebellion was now held firmly by the rightful king, guarded with vigilance and wisdom. The other gods did not resent his sovereignty. Instead, they rejoiced in it, for his victory had freed them from fear. They brought their gifts to him, raising him above themselves, acknowledging his dominion. Their voices united in hymns that proclaimed his greatness, and their temples resounded with chants of his names. To serve Marduk was to serve the balance of the cosmos, for in him was the union of power and wisdom, storm and creation. He was the god who had faced the abyss and emerged not only as victor, but as architect of existence. Yet in the human heart, questions stirred. They wondered at the cost of their creation. Why must they serve? Why must their labor feed the gods? Why was their blood mingled with that of a rebel? The priests answered with stories, reminding them that service was not punishment, but purpose. To work for the gods was to sustain the world itself. Without their offerings, the temples would crumble, the rituals would fade, and the waters of chaos might rise once more. Humanity bore a heavy burden, yet it was also an honor, for in their toil they shared in the divine work of creation. Thus the myth of Marduk was not simply a tale of gods and monsters, but a mirror of life itself. It spoke of struggle and triumph, of duty and rebellion, of order and chaos. It explained the stars above, the rivers below, and the labor of men between them. And it whispered a truth that lingered across generations. That order is never final, that creation is always fragile, and that every sunrise is another victory of light over the shadows of the deep. The order Marduk had forged was not only celestial but earthly. Kings upon the land ruled in reflection of his sovereignty, bearing the weight of justice and law as he bore the tablets of destiny. In Babylon, the earthly king was not merely a man of power, but a servant of the divine. His throne was bound to the throne of Marduk, his decrees echoes of the cosmic order. To rule justly was to walk in harmony with the God of creation. To rule unjustly was to tilt the balance and invite chaos once more. Every king of Babylon knew this truth, and during the great New Year festival, the bond between God and king was renewed. The high priest would strip the king of his crown, his scepter, his royal robes. In the temple he stood humbled, face struck, tears drawn forth, confessing his faults before Marduk. Only when the god's favor was confirmed was he clothed again in royal garments, restored to his throne, and blessed to continue his reign. It was a ritual that reminded both ruler and people alike that all power flowed from Marduk, that kingship on earth was but a shadow of kingship in heaven. Thus, the myth of creation was not only a cosmic story, but a political truth. The city of Babylon was exalted as the dwelling place of the supreme God, and its rulers, chosen by his favor, bore the divine duty of maintaining order. The laws carved into stone, the judgments passed in court, the weights and measures of trade, all were extensions of the order Marduk had spoken when he split the body of Tiamat. To obey the king was to uphold creation. To defy him was to risk awakening the chaos that slumbered beneath the earth. And yet, within this order, the people found a strange comfort. For though their lives were filled with labor, they knew their place in the cosmos. The crops they sowed were not only for themselves, but for the gods. The bricks they laid built not only homes, but the eternal ziggurats that reached to heaven. Their sacrifices were more than food for the divine. They were tokens that reaffirmed the balance, offerings that kept the abyss at bay. Each act, no matter how small, was woven into the great drama of creation. So the myth lived in daily life, not as distant legend, but as the very breath of the city. The roar of the market echoed the roar of the sea. The laws of the king echoed the commands of Marduk. The rivers that watered the fields whispered of Tiamat's blood. And each sunrise reminded the people that order had triumphed, that chaos had been subdued, and that life could continue beneath the firmament, set in place by the hand of their champion. But the story of Marduk was not only about victory, it was also about transformation. For in slaying Tiamat, he had not annihilated her essence. He had reshaped it, weaving her chaos into the foundation of life itself. The world was not built from purity, but from the mingling of destruction and creation, of storm and sea. This truth lingered in every corner of existence, in the fertile floods that destroyed and nourished, in the storms that ruined crops yet renewed the land, in the cycles of life and death that could not be severed. The ancients understood that the cosmos was born of conflict. Creation itself was an act of struggle, and harmony could never exist without tension. Marduk's order was not fragile because it was weak, but because it was alive, dynamic, forever balancing against the pull of chaos. The people of Babylon saw this truth in their own lives. They endured hardship, yet from toil came sustenance. They faced suffering, yet from suffering came strength. Just as the god had drawn the world from the corpse of a monster, so too did men draw meaning from the struggles of their days. In the temples, this truth was honored with offerings and chants. The priests sang of Marduk's 50 names, of his power to create, of his wisdom to judge. They invoked him as warrior, as creator, as king, as shepherd. They reminded the people that he was not distant, but present in every cycle of life. The rains that fell, the crops that grew, the stars that turned all were signs of his continuing reign. To doubt this was to doubt the very ground beneath their feet. For without him, the world would dissolve back into the formless sea. Thus, the myth was a comfort, but also a warning. For as much as it praised the triumph of order, it also whispered that chaos was never gone. It lay beneath, waiting, eternal as the waters from which the gods had first risen. Only vigilance, ritual, and obedience could keep it bound. This was the lesson passed from priest to king, from king to people, from parent to child. It was a story that held them together, a story that gave meaning to their labor, a story that explained the cycles of storm and flood, life and death. And so, as night fell and the stars gleamed, the people looked upward with reverence. Each constellation a reminder of order, each flickering light a guardian set by Marduk's hand. The heavens were not silent. They were alive with the memory of a battle fought in the beginning, a battle whose echo could still be felt in every breath of wind and every wave upon the shore. The gods themselves never forgot the terror of Tiamat. Though Marduk had triumphed, they had once trembled before her vastness, her roar that shook the heavens, and so their praise for him was more than celebration. It was gratitude. It was relief. It was acknowledgement that without him they would have been swept into nothingness. In their assembly they raised him high, not only as king but as protector, the one who bore the burden none else dared to face. They entrusted to him their safety, their destinies, their very existence. In this act, the pattern of kingship was sealed. The king was not only a ruler, but a guardian, not only one who gave commands, but one who stood between chaos and order. In Marduk, the model was set. In the kings of Babylon, it was mirrored. Each mortal ruler, in their time, was expected to be a reflection of that cosmic victory, a shepherd who kept chaos at bay through justice, ritual, and strength. This truth was not hidden in secret chambers, but displayed in stone and clay. The Enuma Elish was inscribed, its verses etched into tablets, its story spoken in courts and temples. The people heard it and knew to their world was not an accident, but the deliberate work of a God who had faced terror and emerged victorious. Their city was not merely a place of bricks and markets, but the chosen dwelling of the King of the gods. Babylon was the heart of creation, the navel of the earth, the place where heaven touched the land. And so the name of Marduk spread far. Hymns to him were sung not only in Babylon but across the lands of Mesopotamia. Merchants carried his name in their prayers. Farmers invoked him with their plows. Kings invoked him in their decrees. He was the God of life, of storm, of kingship, of justice, of wisdom. He was not bound to a single form, for in him was gathered the essence of all. But even as his name grew, the story remained the same. The clash of storm and sea, the slaying of the chaos dragon, the shaping of heaven and earth, the creation of mankind. Each retelling reaffirmed the balance. Each hymn renewed the bond. And though generations passed, though empires rose and fell, the story endured, for it was more than myth. It was the memory of creation itself. And without it, the people could not understand the world in which they lived. In the quiet of night, when the rivers reflected the stars, the people would whisper the tale. They would remind their children that the world was not always as it was, that once it had been a sea of chaos, ruled by a great and terrible mother. They would speak of Apsu, the silent waters, and of his slaying at the hands of Ea. They would speak of Tiamat's grief, her fury, and her rising against the younger gods. And then they would speak of Marduk, the champion, the one who did what none other dared. In those moments, the story was not only distant myth but personal truth, for every person knew the pull of chaos, the fear of floods, the terror of storms, the sorrow of death, the uncertainty of life. To hear of Marduk was to hear that even in the face of such vastness, order could be won. It was a comfort whispered to children in their beds, a reassurance spoken to farmers at their fields, a strength given to kings on their thrones. The priests deepened this truth with ritual. When they chanted the Enuma Elish, their voices were not their own, but echoes of the divine council. When they named Marduk's 50 titles, they were not simply praising but participating, weaving themselves into the cosmic order. To speak his names was to stabilize the cosmos once more, to ensure that the bonds of heaven and earth did not weaken. Words carried power, and in those words creation was renewed, yet beneath the comfort there remained a solemn warning. Chaos was not gone. The waters of Tiamat still pressed at the edges of creation. The blood of Kingu still ran in the veins of mankind. Storms still rose, rivers still flooded, wars still broke out, reminding all that the struggle was never finished. Marduk's victory was eternal, yet it had to be remembered, invoked, renewed. The cosmos was not a machine that turned on its own, but a fragile balance upheld by gods, men, and ritual. And so the people lived between order and chaos, between service and rebellion, between faith and fear. Their lives were woven into the great story, and every act, however small, became part of that ongoing battle. In their offerings, in their prayers, in their very breath, they helped to sustain the order that Marduk had carved from the body of the abyss. In the temples of Babylon, the sacred words of the Enuma Elish were more than poetry. They were living acts, words that resonated with the very fabric of creation. When the priests chanted the verses, it was believed that the cosmos itself was listening, that the heavens and earth leaned in to hear the story of their own birth. Each line spoken was a thread woven back into the tapestry, each rhythm a beat that kept the heart of order alive. The people gathered to listen, their eyes lifted to the towering ziggurats, their ears filled with the echoes of ancient battle. At the New Year festival, the most solemn moment came when the high priest took the hand of the statue of Marduk and led it in procession. The god was not a figure of distant myth, but a living presence within the city. His image walked among the people, his story spoken in their streets. As he was paraded through Babylon, the crowd saw again the champion who split the body of Tiamat, the king who fixed the heavens, the shepherd who ordered their days. They wept, they sang, they rejoiced, for in that moment the cosmos was renewed. Kings stood humbled before this presence. Even the mightiest ruler laid down his crown before Marduk, confessing faults, seeking forgiveness, receiving again the right to rule. The people saw their king as both servant and mirror of the god. His justice reflected Marduk's law. His strength echoed Marduk's victory. To live under such kingship was to live under the shadow of the storm god, to trust that chaos would remain bound, that the rivers would remain in their courses, that the stars would not falter from their paths. But the story also reminded them of fragility. For if Marduk had once fought chaos, might chaos not rise again? If the order of the world depended on ritual, what if ritual was neglected? These questions lingered in every heart, shaping a culture that lived in reverence and caution. Every prayer, every offering, every hymn was more than devotion. It was protection, a shield against the waters, pressing at the edges of the world. And so, under the night sky, when the stars turned above Babylon, the people knew. They lived not in a silent universe, but in one held together by memory, ritual, and the enduring power of their champion. Their world was fragile, but it was alive. And its beating heart was the story of Marduk, the storm-born king who tamed the sea of chaos. As centuries passed, the story deepened. It was not forgotten or left as an echo of the past. It grew, evolved, and shaped the way kings ruled and priests spoke. Babylon rose as the sacred city, the axis of the earth, the place where heaven's will touched the soil of men. Its towers stood as reminders that Marduk's throne was not only in the heavens, but also in the heart of the land. To live in Babylon was to live in the very center of the cosmos, chosen and favored by the God who had brought creation from the abyss. The hymns to Marduk multiplied. They praised him as warrior, as king, as judge, as healer. They spoke of his bow, his net, his spear. They spoke of his wisdom, his command, his mercy. Each hymn was like a jewel, reflecting a different light of his divinity. To recite them was to bind oneself closer to him, to remember that every drop of rain, every gust of wind, every harvest was the fruit of his labor. Yet in these hymns, the memory of Tiamat was never far. She was the shadow behind the light, the sea beneath the land, the silence beneath the song. Her defeat was not erased but remembered, for without her there would be no cosmos, no rivers, no mountains, no sky. In a paradox both solemn and beautiful, she was both enemy and mother, destroyer and foundation. The people honored Marduk's victory, but they also carried within them a quiet reverence for the chaos from which all had sprung. The balance was delicate, and they knew it. Floods, storms, droughts, each was a reminder that chaos was still present, still pushing against the walls of creation. Marduk's reign was eternal, yet it required vigilance. His story was not only past but present, and to forget it was to weaken the bonds that held the world together. This was why the priests recited, why the people gathered, why the festivals repeated year after year. It was not habit, but necessity, the constant renewal of a fragile harmony. Thus Babylon thrived beneath the gaze of Marduk. its people living in the rhythm of his story. They worked, they prayed, they sacrificed, all within the grand order that had been spoken at the dawn of time. And when they looked to the horizon, where the sun rose and fell, they remembered. It was Marduk who had set it upon its path. Marduk who held the heavens in place. Marduk who split the sea and gave them a world to call their own. The myth of Marduk became more than a story told at festivals. It became the very foundation of identity for Babylon and its people. To belong to Babylon was to belong to the city chosen by the king of the gods. It was to live in the place where heaven and earth were joined, where rituals bound the stars to their courses and ensured the flow of rivers. Every stone of the city seemed to echo the victory over Tiamat. Every temple wall bore witness to the storm-born god who had carved order from the abyss. The kings of Babylon carried this truth with pride. Their rule was never presented as the work of mere men. They were chosen, appointed, anointed by Marduk himself. Their crowns gleamed not only with gold, but with divine authority. Their decrees spoken as reflections of cosmic law. In times of peace they offered gratitude to Marduk, and in times of war they prayed for his storms to scatter their enemies. They saw themselves as extensions of his kingship, guardians of the fragile harmony he had secured. And yet, beneath the splendor of Babylonian rule, the whisper of chaos remained. The rivers that nourished their fields could turn violent, bursting their banks, drowning crops, swallowing homes. The winds that filled their sails could also tear apart their cities. Disease crept through the streets, famine haunted the poor, and wars brought devastation to the land. In all these events, the people saw the lingering presence of Tiamat, the eternal truth that chaos was never destroyed, only subdued. It was a shadow that reminded them of the importance of devotion, of ritual, of remembering the story of creation. The priests taught that to neglect Marduk was to weaken the bonds of order. Every offering was a barrier, every chant a wall, every prayer a guard. When men faltered, chaos surged. But when they were faithful, the harmony endured. In this way, the people's daily lives were tied to the very fabric of the cosmos. Their toil in fields and temples was not only for survival, but for the survival of creation itself. Thus, the story of Marduk was woven into both grandeur and humility. It exalted the king as mirror of the god, yet it also placed responsibility upon the common man. The farmer plowing his field, the potter shaping clay, the mother whispering prayers over her children, all were participants in the cosmic balance. All were keepers of the order that had been won in the beginning. And in their hearts, they knew, to live was to share in the eternal struggle between storm and sea, between order and chaos. In the great libraries of Mesopotamia, scribes etched the story of Marduk onto clay tablets, their styluses pressed into wet clay, line after line, preserving the tale for generations yet unborn. Each mark was more than writing. It was a safeguard, a preservation of memory, a shield against the fading of truth. For to forget the battle of the beginning was to forget the foundation of existence itself. And so the Enuma Elish was not only recited aloud, but carved into permanence, set into the archives of kings and temples. These tablets spoke not only of gods and monsters, but of the structure of life. They explained why the stars moved in their courses, why the rivers flowed, why men toiled. They told of a God who rose above all others, not by inheritance, but by courage. They told of a world born not in silence, but in conflict. And they reminded all who read them that every day of order was a continuation of Marduk's victory. Every sunrise, another proof that chaos had been subdued. For the Babylonians, time itself was cyclical. Just as the festivals renewed the cosmos, so too did the story of Marduk remind them that beginnings were never truly past. Creation was not an event long finished, but a rhythm that continued, pulsing through every season, every year. The battle of Marduk and Tiamat was eternal, replayed in the cycles of nature, in the struggles of men, in the rise and fall of kings. When storms broke over the city, the people heard Tiamat's roar. When floods tore through the land, they saw her waters rising. And when peace returned, when crops flourished, when the stars shone clear, they knew Marduk still held the world in his grasp. To live in Babylon was to live with this constant awareness, this sense that the cosmos was alive, precarious, and sacred. And so the story endured. It was spoken in temples, written in libraries, sung in hymns, whispered in homes. It was the thread that tied the people to their God, the chain that bound the heavens to the earth. And in every telling, in every prayer, the people remembered that their lives were not their own, but part of a greater struggle, part of a cosmic order born from the storm and the sea. As Babylon grew in splendor, so too did the reverence for Marduk. His temple Esagila stood at the heart of the city, its sacred halls filled with incense and hymns, its ziggurat rising toward the heavens like the cosmic mountain of creation. Within its chambers, priests tended the image of the god, clothed it, fed it, and treated it as though Marduk himself dwelled among them. To the people, this was no mere statue, but the living presence of their divine king. To stand in the temple was to stand in the center of the universe, at the very axis where heaven and earth were joined. The rituals performed there were vast and intricate. Daily offerings of food and drink, incense and music, prayers and chants. But it was during the great New Year festival that the temple became the stage of the cosmos itself. For 12 days the city transformed, its streets filled with processions, its altars blazing with sacrifice, its people immersed in the drama of creation. The Enuma Elish was recited in full, the story of Tiamat and Marduk spoken as though it were unfolding in the present moment. The king himself was humbled, stripped of regalia, confessing his failings before the god. And only when the statue of Marduk was paraded through the city, only when the story had been spoken, was the king restored to his throne, his right to rule renewed. In this way, the city itself became a mirror of creation. Just as Marduk had slain chaos and brought forth order, so too did Babylon renew itself each year, ensuring that chaos did not rise again. The people knew their role in this drama. They offered their labor, their prayers, their voices, sustaining the delicate harmony. For without their devotion, the walls of creation might weaken, the abyss might surge, and the balance might be lost. And yet, this devotion was not born only from fear. It was also born from awe. For to live in the shadow of Esagila, to see its towers stretch toward the sky, to hear the chants of the priests and the sound of the great festivals, was to feel the nearness of the divine. Life was hard, filled with toil, but it was also sacred. Every act was tied to the story of the God who had split the sea. Every moment, a reflection of the eternal drama that had given them their world. But even as Marduk reigned supreme in Babylon, the shadow of Tiamat lingered, for chaos was never truly banished. It lay beneath the rivers, beneath the earth, beneath the storms. It whispered in the winds. It surged in the floods. It lurked in the silence of the desert. The people knew this, and their rituals reflected it. To neglect Marduk was not merely impiety, but danger. For in neglect lay weakness, and in weakness chaos would return. The priests reminded the people that Tiamat was still present, though bound and reshaped. Her body was the very world beneath their feet. her waters the rivers that sustained them, her essence the cycles that gave them life. She had not vanished, but been transformed, and in her transformation lay both blessing and warning. For the world was fertile because of her, yet fragile because of her. It was order born from chaos, a delicate harmony that could never be forgotten. Thus, the myth was not only about triumph, but about vigilance. It taught that order must be renewed, that kings must be humble, that people must be faithful, that rituals must be performed, for the abyss was always there, pressing at the edges, waiting for neglect to loosen the bonds. And so the story was told again and again, each telling not only remembrance but renewal, each prayer a barrier, each hymn a wall, each offering a thread that bound the world together. And as generations passed, the story did not fade. It endured in clay, in chant, in temple, in the memory of a people who knew that their lives were suspended between storm and sea. They saw in the rising sun the proof of Marduk's command, in the flowing rivers the trace of Tiamat's body, in the stars above the order of heaven. And so they lived, their days woven into the great story, their nights filled with the quiet knowledge that the cosmos was fragile, and that only through devotion could it endure. The story of Marduk was more than Babylonian pride. It became the soul of empire, a myth that justified kingship and bound people to their city. Babylon was not merely one kingdom among many. It was proclaimed as the chosen dwelling of the God who had tamed the abyss. Its kings were not ordinary rulers. They were guardians of the cosmic balance, entrusted with the sacred duty of ensuring that chaos never rose again. This belief gave Babylon its strength, its identity, its destiny. To live within its walls was to live at the center of creation. Every brick of its ziggurats, every stone of its walls, every altar in its temples was a reflection of the battle between Marduk and Tiamat. The people walked through its markets with the knowledge that they dwelled in the city chosen by the supreme God. Even in times of hardship, even when famine or war cast shadows upon the land, they clung to the belief that Marduk still reigned, that his victory was eternal, that his protection endured. Yet the myth also held a profound humility, for it reminded kings that their power was not their own. No matter how mighty, no king could claim the throne without bowing before Marduk. Each New Year festival brought this truth into ritual. The king was stripped of all symbols of rule, struck, and forced to confess his faults. Only when Marduk's favor was affirmed could he be restored. This act was not humiliation but renewal, a reminder that the king was servant before he was ruler, that his authority flowed from the divine storm god who had tamed the sea. The people too were bound by this rhythm. Their offerings sustained the temples, their prayers upheld the balance, their labor fed the gods. It was not seen as a burden, but as a sacred duty, for in serving the gods they ensured their own survival. To neglect the offerings was to weaken the bonds of creation, to risk unleashing the chaos that lingered beneath. And so every loaf of bread laid on an altar, every animal sacrificed, every hymn sung became an act of cosmic significance, a thread holding back the abyss. Thus Babylon thrived, not only through walls and armies, but through story and ritual. Its strength lay not only in power, but in the myth that bound its people to their God, that made every act part of a greater harmony. And at the heart of it all was Marduk, the storm-born champion who had risen against the sea and brought forth the world from her ruin. Still, the people never forgot that creation was born from conflict. They knew that the cosmos was not a place of pure peace, but of balance, of tension, of order rising from struggle. They saw it in the fields they tilled, for every harvest was born from toil, sweat, and risk. They saw it in the rivers, for their waters brought life, but could also bring ruin. They saw it in their own hearts, for within them stirred both obedience and rebellion, both devotion and unrest. The myth of Marduk was not only a tale of gods, but a mirror of the human condition. The priests explained that this duality was no accident. Humanity had been formed from the blood of Kingu, the rebel who once bore the tablets of destiny. In mankind's veins flowed the memory of defiance. It was why men could dream, create, and aspire, but also why they could resist, fight, and destroy. This tension was not curse alone. It was also gift, for without it, humans would be lifeless servants, incapable of growth. With it, they became participants in the cosmic drama, capable of both upholding and endangering the balance. Thus, men were not only workers for the gods, but guardians of creation. Their prayers strengthened the bonds of order. Their offerings nourished the divine. Their rituals renewed the cosmos. Every household became a temple in miniature. Every life a reflection of the great story. To live rightly was to walk in harmony with Marduk's law. To stray was to awaken the shadow of Tiamat within. And so the story shaped not only cities and temples, but the very way people saw themselves. They were not insignificant specks in a vast universe. They were born of clay and divine blood, bound to the fate of gods, entrusted with the task of sustaining creation. Their lives, however humble, were echoes of the struggle that had shaped heaven and earth. And when they looked to the stars, to the rivers, to the rising sun, they remembered the world was fragile, yet alive, and their role within it was sacred, eternal, and profound. The kings of Babylon often invoked Marduk's name in their inscriptions, carving into stone the proof of their devotion. They proclaimed that their victories were not their own, but gifts from the king of the gods. When they built walls, they said it was at Marduk's command. When they conquered lands, they declared it was by his favor. When they established laws, they proclaimed it was his justice made manifest. In this way, every act of governance was linked back to the storm-born god who had once tamed the sea. The people, reading these words etched upon bricks and stelas, understood their rulers not as men alone, but as instruments of the divine order. To defy the king was to defy Marduk. To obey was to strengthen the cosmos itself. This gave Babylon not only power, but unity, for it bound its people together in a shared myth, a shared destiny, a shared sense that their city stood at the heart of the world. The myth also carried comfort in times of trial. When enemies threatened the city, the people remembered that Marduk had once defeated chaos itself. If he could slay Tiamat, surely he could defend them from foreign kings. When famine struck, they remembered that the rivers had flowed from the body of the chaos dragon, and that even destruction could be reshaped into life. The myth did not deny suffering, but it gave meaning to it, weaving hardship into the eternal struggle between storm and sea. And so, across generations, the story endured. It was spoken in markets, whispered in homes, carved into clay, and sung in temples. Children learned it at their mother's side. Kings proclaimed it on their thrones. Priests thundered it in rituals. It became the rhythm of life, the heartbeat of Babylon, the foundation upon which its greatness was built. And through it all, the people remembered that their lives were not small or forgotten. They were part of the cosmic order, part of the eternal story that began when Marduk raised his bow against the abyss. But the story of Marduk was not only for the people of Babylon. It reached beyond, carried by merchants, scribes, and kings across Mesopotamia. The tale of the storm god who slew the sea dragon echoed in other lands, reshaping and blending with other myths. In some places, the name of Marduk was spoken. In others, the hero bore different titles, yet always the theme endured: the triumph of order over chaos, of light over darkness, of life drawn from struggle. This spreading of the myth gave it a universality that outlived kingdoms. The people of Akkad, Assyria, and beyond all heard echoes of it, for the truth it carried was not bound to one city. All men knew the tension of chaos and order. All men feared the floods and storms. All men hoped for a power to tame the wildness of existence. And so, the story of Marduk resonated, adapting, surviving, enduring through ages. Still, in Babylon, he remained supreme. His temple rose above all others. His festivals eclipsed all others. His kingship defined the rhythm of the city. To live there was to walk in his shadow, to feel the weight of his gaze, to know that every sunrise was his command fulfilled. And yet, even in his greatness, the story never let the people forget the shadow of Tiamat. For without her, there would be no world. Without her, there would be no rivers, no mountains, no stars. She was defeated, but she was also mother, slain, yet transformed. Chaos, yet foundation. In this paradox lay the deepest truth of the myth, that life was born not in peace but in conflict, that harmony was not the absence of chaos, but its transformation, that every breath, every harvest, every sunrise was a fragile balance, sustained by vigilance, devotion, and the will of the gods. And at the center of it all stood Marduk, the storm-born champion, king of the gods, shepherd of creation. The priests of Babylon never ceased to remind the people that the cosmos was alive, fragile, and ever in need of renewal. They taught that each ritual was not mere formality, but the reenactment of creation itself. When incense rose, it was the rising of order. When hymns were chanted, it was the voice of Marduk calling the stars to their courses. When sacrifices were laid upon the altar, it was the blood of Kingu transformed into service, a binding of chaos into harmony. The people, through these acts, did not simply honor their god. They participated in the very balance of the universe. This truth gave daily life a sacred weight. To work the fields was to echo Marduk's shaping of the earth from Tiamat's body. To carry water was to mirror the flow of rivers drawn from her eyes. To weave cloth, to mold clay, to build walls. Each act was an echo of the God who had formed creation from the formless deep. The story made every task meaningful, every moment part of the eternal struggle and the eternal harmony. And as the people labored, the story gave them hope. For if Marduk had tamed the sea, then surely he could tame the storms of life. If he had transformed destruction into creation, then surely their suffering could be turned into renewal. In famine, they saw not only hardship, but the memory of chaos pressing in, a reminder to turn to Marduk for deliverance. In war, they saw not only enemies, but the reflection of the ancient battle, a chance for order to triumph once again. Thus, Marduk's myth was more than memory. It was living truth, spoken in the breath of prayer, written in clay, enacted in ritual, lived in daily toil. It was the heartbeat of Babylon, steady and enduring, binding heaven and earth together in a fragile but eternal embrace. But even as Babylon thrived, the people knew that no order was unchallenged. Chaos might sleep, but it never died. The rivers could swell beyond their banks. Storms could rise without warning. Foreign armies could sweep through the land like floods. Each of these was seen as a reminder of the deep, a stirring of Tiamat's essence, a whisper that the bonds of creation must always be guarded. For the cosmos was not a fortress of stone, but a living balance renewed through devotion and vigilance. The priests told the people that Marduk's victory was eternal, yet its renewal depended upon them. If rituals ceased, if offerings were neglected, if kings forgot their duty, then the walls of order would weaken. It was not enough to believe in Marduk. One had to live within his order. One had to act. One had to sustain the harmony he had fought to establish. This responsibility bound gods, kings, and people alike. None were exempt, for all were part of the great design. Even so, there was comfort in this responsibility, for it meant that every person mattered. The farmer, the potter, the merchant, the king, all had roles within the cosmic order. All shared in the story. No life was too small, no task too humble, for each act was a thread woven into the vast tapestry of creation. The people were not lost in the immensity of the universe. They were participants in it, co-keepers of the balance born from the storm and the sea. And so, Babylon lived with both pride and humility. Pride, for they were chosen by Marduk, their city the dwelling of the supreme god. Humility, for they knew that chaos was always near, and that only through vigilance and devotion could order endure. This tension gave their lives meaning, shaping their days with rhythm, their nights with awe, their generations with continuity. The myth was not distant, it was breath, heartbeat, and the turning of stars. As the story endured, it reached beyond myth into philosophy. The wise men of Babylon, gazing at the stars, saw in their ordered movements the reflection of Marduk's decree. The constellations were not random scatterings of light. They were stations of the gods, placed in their courses when Marduk fixed the heavens. To read the sky was to read the will of the gods, to see in its patterns the law that bound all things. Astrology was not idle curiosity, it was reverence, a way of discerning the harmony spoken in the beginning. The scribes, copying the Enuma Elish onto clay, knew that they were not preserving only words, but the very foundation of the world. Each stroke of the stylus pressed into clay was like a binding knot, another safeguard against the fading of truth. For as long as the story was remembered, chaos could not overwhelm. But if it were forgotten, if silence replaced the hymns and rituals, then the abyss might rise again. Thus, memory itself became sacred, the act of retelling a duty as vital as sacrifice or prayer. In the lives of common people, this sense of sacred memory gave comfort. The fisherman casting nets into the river remembered that its waters were the tears of Tiamat, reshaped into life-giving streams. The potter shaping clay remembered that mankind itself had been molded from earth and blood, born of both rebellion and divine command. The mother, whispering to her child, remembered that their lives were fragile but meaningful, sustained by Marduk's watchful gaze. Every part of life was touched by the myth, every act an echo of creation. And yet, within this comfort lay awareness. For the people knew that storms, famine, and war were not only earthly misfortunes, but cosmic tremors. They were the reminders that chaos was never gone, that vigilance must never fail. Marduk's victory was eternal, but it was also alive, demanding remembrance, ritual, and devotion. The story was not an old tale. It was the living breath of the world itself. The kings, too, carried this awareness. When they built great walls, they proclaimed that they did so under Marduk's blessing, not merely to defend their city, but to mirror the order of the cosmos. When they issued laws, they declared them reflections of the tablets of destiny, now held secure in Marduk's grasp. Justice was not a human invention, but a cosmic truth, part of the order established when chaos was subdued. To break the law was to weaken the balance, to invite the waters of the abyss to rise again. In times of war, when enemies threatened Babylon, the kings turned to Marduk as warrior. They prayed for his storms to scatter their foes, for his net to ensnare them, for his spear to pierce their strength. Every battle was seen as a reflection of the primal struggle. Every victory an echo of the day Marduk loosed his arrow into the heart of Tiamat. To fight was not only survival but participation in the eternal war between order and chaos. But kings also knew humility. For in the New Year festival, they were reminded that their crowns could not stand without Marduk's favor. They were stripped, beaten, and made to weep before the god, confessing their faults. In that moment, the mighty ruler was as fragile as the humblest servant. Only when the god's favor was renewed could he reclaim his throne. Thus, kingship itself became a cycle, an echo of creation, a continual reminder that no power on earth was greater than the storm-born king of the gods. The people watched these rituals and found strength in them. For if their ruler humbled himself before Marduk, then surely the god still reigned. If their king was restored, then surely the world itself was restored with him. The city's rhythm was renewed, its cosmos made firm once again. And in their hearts, the people knew that their place within this cycle mattered. They were not forgotten, not insignificant, but threads within the vast design, bound to Marduk's eternal victory. Through centuries, the story of Marduk lived on, whispered in temples, carved into clay, carried in memory. Even as empires shifted, even as new kings rose and old ones fell, the myth endured, for it was deeper than any crown, older than any city. It was not bound to time, for it spoke of the beginning of all things, and of the eternal balance between chaos and order. Each generation found in it the meaning of their world. Each heart found in it comfort against the uncertainty of life. The people knew that storms would come, that floods would rise, that wars would break upon the land. But they also knew that Marduk had faced far greater. If he had slain the sea dragon, if he had split her body to form the heavens and earth, then surely he could protect them through their trials. His victory was not distant but present, woven into the fabric of every sunrise, every harvest, every breath. To remember him was to live in hope. To forget him was to risk being swept away into silence. And so the rituals continued. The festivals returned with each year. The hymns rose like waves of sound through the temple halls. The priests spoke his 50 names, the people bowed, the king humbled himself, and the cosmos was renewed again and again. Babylon became not just a city of brick and stone, but a living reflection of creation itself, its life bound to the eternal story of storm and sea. The myth also traveled outward, shaping the imaginations of distant lands. In the echoes of other stories, in the rise of other gods, one can still hear the roar of Tiamat, the arrow of Marduk, the birth of order from chaos. Though names changed, though tongues differed, the rhythm remained the tale of creation, through conflict, of harmony drawn from struggle. It was the universal memory of mankind, carried through the ages, alive in every story of storm and sun, river and sky. And so, in the quiet of night, beneath the stars Marduk had fixed in their stations, the people of Babylon would look upward and remember. They would remember that the sky above was the body of a dragon split in two, that the rivers that fed their fields were the tears of the abyss, that the soil beneath their feet was the flesh of chaos reshaped into life. They would remember that their God, born of wisdom and storm, had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious, and that his victory was not only his own, but theirs. In this remembrance was peace. The world was fragile, yes, but it was also sacred. Every dawn was a gift, every harvest a triumph, every heartbeat a sign that the cosmos endured. To live was to share in Marduk's victory, to bear the responsibility of sustaining the order he had established. And though chaos still whispered at the edges, though storms still raged, though floods still rose, they knew that the balance held. For as long as they remembered, as long as they honored, as long as they lived within the rhythm of the story, the world would endure. Thus the tale of Marduk, the god who defeated Tiamat, was not a story that ended. It was a story without end, echoing through time, binding gods and men, heavens and earth, storm and sea. It was the heartbeat of Babylon, the breath of its people, the foundation of its kingship, the rhythm of its festivals, the meaning of its toil. And even now, as the stars shine above, one can almost hear the echo of that ancient battle. The rush of winds, the roar of waters, the crack of bowstring, the cry of dragon, the silence after. For in that silence, creation was born. And in that silence still dwells the memory of the god who brought order from the abyss. Marduk, king of the gods, shepherd of creation, eternal champion of light against the shadow of the sea. And so the tale of Marduk, the storm-born champion who slew the dragon of chaos, lingers not only in ancient tablets, but in the very fabric of existence. The rivers still flow with Tiamat's essence, the stars still shine where he set them, and the fragile balance of order and chaos continues with every breath we take. If you enjoyed this journey through myth and memory, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know which story you'd like to hear next. Until then, may the calm of creation's order guide your dreams, and may the echo of ancient voices carry you gently into rest.